Right, good afternoon. It's May 19th at 1 o'clock. So we are getting ready to start our Ag Innovation Board meeting. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded as public record, and that participation in a recorded meeting will be deemed as consent to be recorded, including statements both written and oral. Public records, including this recording, can be requested at any time in accordance with the Vermont Public Records Act. So welcome, everybody. Happy May. And I'm going to start off. We usually start with our introduction, so I'll try and get our members first. So I'll start just going down my list. Steve, do I know? Oh,
Steve Donnell, Director of the Farm Division and board member, AIB board member.
thanks, Steve. Leon?
Leon Course, I'm an organic dairy farmer in southern Vermont. I'm also on the board.
Thanks, Leon. Roy?
Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm not sure.
Yes, yep.
Okay. Roy Beckford, Associate Dean and Director of Extension at UVM, also on the board.
Great, thanks for joining. Ryan?
Hi, everyone. Ryan Rebozo, Science Director at the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, also on the board.
Sean?
Sean Lucas, UVM Extension, Extension Agronomist in the Middlebury office.
Thanks, Sean. Pam?
Hi, I'm Pam Wadman. I'm a Environmental Health Risk Assessor with the Department of Health, also on the board. Thanks.
Thanks, Pam. In the room, I'll go around here and then I'll hit everybody else. So Pam Breyer.
I'm Pam Breyer. I'm agrochemical toxicologist with the Farm Division. Stephanie Smith with the Farm Division, Associate Director.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Shannon Choquette. I am with the DEC Solid Waste Program.
And I know I was only showing part of us.
Yeah, that is the camera. Right?
Yeah, okay.
I'm Morgan Griffith. I work at the Agency of Agriculture and the Farm Division, and I am a member of the board. We also have, let's see, Amanda Albers.
Yeah, Amanda Albers joining from Bayer Crop Science.
Thanks, Amanda. Patty?
Patty Casey, Environmental Surveillance Program Director with Farm Division Agency of Ag. I am not on the board.
Thanks, Patty. Brooke?
Hey everybody, Brooke Decker, Pollinator Health Specialist with the Agency of Agriculture, and I too am not on the board.
Dylan?
Hello, this is Dylan Gabbert. I'm with CropLife America and RISE.
Ben Gothier? Thanks for joining.
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Ben Gothier. I work for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation and the Solid Waste Management Program, mainly doing permitting on organics facilities, and I am not on the board. Good to see you all.
Thanks for joining, Ben. We're going to hear from him a little bit later. And I think my last one is Zach.
Zach Shkowski, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, Agricultural Resource Management Specialist, and to continue the trend, also not on the board.
Thanks. Great. So today we are going to start off with just a little bit of logistics. So I sent out the meeting minutes from our March meeting. I didn't hear about any edits, but are members okay with those minutes as they were presented? Seeing a nod. Cool. And then The only other kind of agency update we have, so we always have this place, we're sitting in person right now in our Williston office. There may be some construction hurdles for us in this office for our July meeting or maybe future. So the in-person option might be, probably will be in our Montpelier offices instead for the July meeting instead of in the Williston one, but that will be reflected in the invite that you see. But just a heads up, if you're trying to come in person, it probably won't be in Williston due to construction in this office building. All right, so next thing that we kind of wanted to touch on is, before we get into the other legislative updates, one is our, what we talk about every time, so our neonic, treated article seed and neonic pesticide best management practices draft rule update. So we actually, at the beginning of May, the House Ag Committee asked to hear testimony about that draft rule and then also about our Ag Innovation Board 2024 annual report, which basically just walked through how we made a recommendation for those BMPs. So first we started with treated seeds and then expanded to be a neonic pesticides as well. So we walked through timeline and kind of how we went through that process to make those recommendations with them. And so then we were on the agenda for ICAR, the Interagency Committee of Administrative Rules. I think I got that right, for May. But they moved us to the following meeting, which is in June. Zach, you could probably tell me when that date is in June.
First Monday in June.
Thank you. So, yep, go ahead.
Oh, nothing. I was just gonna say I don't know the date, so it's the first Monday in June now.
June 9th. June 9th.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. June 9th. So that's when that first process should continue for the draft rule, and then there will be many opportunities after that for continued public comment as it goes through the rulemaking process. So with that, I just wanted to check with Steve. Did you have any other agency update?
Not that I think of right now. I mean, the after the ICAR, then we'll go into public rulemaking, and that'll be, we'll keep the board informed about the progress of that and the dates for those. For the public hearing dates. So yeah, that's it for now, I guess.
Okay. Okay, so then just for the rest of our legislative update, I'm gonna let Stephanie talk a little.
Yeah, this is a quick update about the miscellaneous agriculture bill. It is H484, and contained within that bill, it's currently, I think, in the Senate Finance, but that bill has been updated by the Senate Agriculture Committee to include a increase in the cost to register pesticide products, an increase of $50 per product. And that fee will be used to cover the cost of pesticide product disposal, actually cover the cost of collection and disposal of pesticides. That was an effort between solid waste management entities and the pesticide industry to increase that fee to cover the cost of pesticide collection and disposal. Currently, the Agency of Agriculture, and it continues, as we're responsible for paying some costs associated with, or defraying the cost of pesticide collection and disposal. But with the increase in the fee associated with registration, we should be able to more fully that cost. And that $50 is dedicated, or for the most part, for pesticide disposal and collection. In addition to that increase in fee, the bill includes that the agency shall work with the Department of Environmental Conservation at the Agency of Natural Resources to conduct a study. And that study is to find options for sustainable funding sources to reimburse those solid waste management entities for all costs associated with collection and disposal of unwanted and obsolete pesticides at hazardous household collection events. Pesticides are currently part of that collection event, and that's why we do this reimbursement grant program that we've been operating for many years. The study should include the prorated cost associated with pesticide collection and disposal, and that includes facilities, equipment, labor, supplies, maintenance, and then individual collection events as well, and the costs associated with those collection events. So, but it's prorated to just cover pesticide disposal. And that study is due December of 2025. So this bill is, again, it's in Senate Finance and is being considered there. But we will go on from there. One of the considerations, however, I should note is that one of the funding options could be an extended producer responsibility program. And we will look to our friends at the Department of Environmental Conservation, who we have on this call today, to assist us as they run many extended producer responsibility programs within the solid waste department, or division. That's my update.
Thank you. Okay, we're flying. So I think that's all we had. Do any members have any questions about things we've talked about before from the legislative session? I see a hand. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, and this is kind of related. I just wanted to take the opportunity to let folks know about this. And Stephanie, you might want to jump in on this one. So the Agricultural Container Research Council, ACRC, supports pesticide container recycling in the United States. And they just announced, about a month ago, Stephanie, or a couple of weeks ago, that they've got a new vendor. They had one company coming around and picking up the rinsed pesticide containers at no charge to agricultural producers who collect them. And they just announced that they've changed. There's a new vendor, and I believe we sent that out. Well, I don't know if we have or not, actually. We need to make sure people know who the new vendor is. So anybody who want, and Stephanie, maybe we can send that out to the board members just as an email so they know who that is in case they want to spread the word.
It's RPM Eco is the name of the new vendor that will collect triple rinsed pesticide containers. I believe it's 55 gallons and less is the size. And they are, we do have information on our website regarding the change in the vendor. It was associated with a previous blog post that the agency had made regarding pesticide container recycling. And it is, yes, ACRC made the announcement. I have an email from the beginning of this month, so May 6th. But happy, if people feel free to contact me if you're interested in knowing more. I'm happy to share this information with anyone that's interested. And it's for farm pesticides and pesticide companies. It's offered, it's a little bit beyond just agriculture, so. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Great.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah,
Can I just quickly ask whether this new vendor will be charging? Because for a moment, I thought that was where Steve was going with it, but wasn't sure.
No charge.
No charge.
Yeah,
No
the ACRC is supported by the pesticide industry. They provide the funding for it. So, and actually, Roy, we need to send that to you, and you can send it out to all your agents. So we need to get that to you.
All right, so we're on, so we've asked today, so basically where we were at in March is we're kind of transitioning away from Unix, which has been our life for the last 2 years. So we're trying to kind of sink our teeth into new topics. And so things that came up last time are tires. What do we do with tires? And because that could be considered as ag inputs that came to the top of a survey that we did last year about what farmers are concerned of, like environmentally. And so ag input, like basically disposal of their ag inputs comes to the top, tires being an example of that in the survey. And so, and then another topic for us to start learning more about is plastics. So we invited 2 of our state colleagues from the Department of Environmental Conservation here to join us to teach us what they know. So we're going to start first with Shannon, and she's going to teach us all about tires, right?
Yes, tires.
All right.
Fun. Just let me share my screen, and I apologize that you can't see me, although I don't know what it would. Oh, I guess, okay, I guess I maybe shouldn't have said that, right?
Let's see what we do. I think it goes over here. Okay. I didn't want to move it over here in case it wanted to only be on me.
Oh, I think it needs to actually point like, yeah.
There.
It's not going to turn at all. It wasn't going to.
Here I am. There you go. Yes, perfect. So, like Morgan said, my name is Shannon. I work for the DEC Solid Waste Program on the material management team. I've worked at the DEC for just under 2 years now. So everything I'm about to share with you is basically a culmination of everything I have learned about scrap tire management in the past 2 years. And so hopefully if you have questions, I'll be able to answer them. But yeah, just jumping right into it, just want to make sure we all are aware of what a tire is. I won't spend too long on this, but you know, the uses of tires in their end life is directly related to what the tire is made out of. So as you can see here are passenger light truck tires that we are all used to using in our own cars. You know, while we think of them as being rubber, they also have some steel, textiles, synthetic polymers, and fillers. When compared to larger truck tires, there is no textile in a larger truck tire, far more steel, far less fillers and, well, not fillers, but the polymers and the antioxidants and all that other stuff. And so the complexity of the makeup of this material is one thing that leads to the complexity of the downstream markets of the material. And just as a little backdrop of, you know, just to get a sense, the vast majority of tires we see in Vermont scrap tire generation is that, you know, the passenger tire, but, you know, while we don't see as many units of commercial tires, they are much heavier. And so tonnage wise, you know, they have a higher tonnage comparable than what you might expect given that commercial tires are only a little over 12% of the market share. And so diving into the end of life tire, ELT, you know, obviously there's acronyms and like everything in the tire industry really loves them. When I went to the scrap tire conference last year in Atlanta, I asked someone what a PET was. No, like a something like and they were like a passenger tire, and I was like, oh, yeah, tires, right? And so end of life tire disposition, and this is a national information provided by the U.S. Tire Manufacturing Association, and so nationally, most tires are still going into tire-derived fuel, which is used in cement kilns and paper kilns. A larger growing portion of tires are being used in ground rubber, you know, and to use like products like artificial turf, and like, you know, the basis of like construction material. I mean, like the roadblocks and things like that. And so they certainly have a growing use outside of TDF. And then Some are still land disposed. There are still states that allow for monofilling or of whole tires or landfilling of shredded tires. And then for the remaining uses, one thing I want to point out is that exported piece. There's a growing trend of tires being exported to countries like India, and I believe are being burned there as fuel as well. But very little, there is no tire to tire recycling because of the complexity of the tire makeup. Although I did just see one manufacturer said that recycled content was going into their tires, but I don't know like if it was recycled tires going into it. And so again, just a little bit about trends over the past decade or so. Tire derived fuel is still holding strong. And, you know, while that is not considered recycling by our state's definitions, it definitely does have a place in this picture that allows us to manage our tires, not in a landfill in the state of Vermont. And again, yeah, growing portions of brown rubber, which is great because that is when the tire is recycled into new products. Just a little bit about the uses. Passenger and light truck tires, like I mentioned, turned into tire-derived fuel used in paper facilities in Maine. I guess I should say the vast majority of scrap tires in the state of Vermont end up at BDS tire recycling in, I think it's Norridgewock, Maine. That facility recently expanded to include crumb rubber manufacturing. So this product on the right, typically it's just large truck tires that are made into that because they do not have the textiles, as you know, they don't have any textiles in their composition. And so the more large truck tires that are generated as scrap tires, the more tires end up in that recycling stream. But yeah, that was one thing. I mean, when I thought tire derived fuel was like melting the tires into this like goo and then like actual fuel. And so that's just one of the things I've learned in the past 2 years is no, it really is just chopped up tires. And as I mentioned, used in paper mills in Maine.
Can
Mm-hmm.
you go back to I just missed the textile part of it. So if there's textiles in it, then they cannot be used for this?
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, because about 4% of our car tires is textiles, but the large truck tires have no textile in it at all. And so that makes it more valuable for the recycling.
Okay.
And not just, you know, tire derived fuel, burning it for fuel. Yes, Steve, I see Steve has a question.
Yeah. So and I don't know if we'll get into it or not, but you know about our tire slicing machine, I suppose.
I do, yes.
Yeah, and so the treads are what's left after the sidewalls are used by farmers. Do the treads contain textiles? Do you know, the tread portion of the tire?
I'm not sure if it's just in the sidewall or if it's on the top. Certainly, I will say when a load of tires goes to BDS in Maine, according to Frank, who runs the facility, they are sorted by hand as they're loaded off of the truck. And so any tire that can go into crumb rubber will go into there. And so without knowing the chemistry of, you know, the exact makeup of it, it's hard to say. But if they deem that it's appropriate for crumb rubber, they'll pull that out and use it as in that.
What happens to the tires that aren't suitable for tire derived fuel or crumb rubber?
Oh, I don't believe, I believe tire derived fuel can take any tire,
okay.
as I understand it. Yeah.
So
They're just
it can
pulling out.
it can have the textile in it too. Okay.
Yes,
All right,
yes.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, I was confused at that too. Okay, got it.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
But,
Yes, Pat?
Sorry to interrupt. I was afraid it might be invisible. So first of all, cool. This is really, really interesting. And I'm grateful, Shannon, for all this information. this may be something that either you're going to go into more later, so just stop me if that's the case. But why do you know why our like AOT isn't using more of the for road resurfacing? Because I do the tire slicing program, and that's been the bane of my existence in dealing with this program, is trying to figure out what we can do with the treads and the tires that are not susceptible to being sliced by the tire slicer. Some of them are mangled and we can't do anything with them. So farmers are looking to get rid of the treads. Like a lot of them are reluctant to have the, slice up their tires, because then they're going to be left with this big pile of treads and they're going to have to dispose of those. Some people use them on the bottoms of the bunks, but if we could say that, these are going to be used for road resurfacing or some other, the other uses that you mentioned, I think people may be more enthusiastic about the program. So just wondering what you know about it.
Yeah, as I understand it, and so right now we're sort of at this place in our country where it seems like there's a lot of discussion about the use of rubber modified asphalt. There's been a negative perception about it in the past, but there's some research coming out that says that it is a viable use and has some environmental benefits when rubber products, recycled rubber products, are included into asphalt. The issue is I forget if it's better with wet pack or dry pack. There's one that it's better with, and so no, we don't typically do it here in Vermont. There is, I believe, one road that has they did an experiment like over a decade ago and built a road with recycled tire content. It didn't meet their standards. And a lot of states right now are at this place where they're just considering making specifications, like at least in the Northeast. And so when I spoke to someone at the scrap tire conference who was a rubber modified asphalt chemist, he had a company, and I was like, I don't see this much in New England. And he's like, that's because your states are so small and none of them have standards yet. And it just doesn't make sense for my company to even try to go up there and work in there. And I was like, oh, and so I thought that was interesting hearing it from that side. What I will say is 10 years down the line, things might look very different with that. There's a lot of research going into how much tire rubber leaches chemicals like 6 PPDQ. It kills salmon, coho salmon on the West Coast. And so, yeah, there is a lot of reluctance to using this product, but there's a lot of research going into it. That being said, as I understand it, tire-derived fuel is a commodity. It is a marketable commodity that is, I don't know if it's necessary in the paper mill world, but because the bark of trees has so much moisture in it, the tire-derived fuel helps to increase the temperature of the burning of those products and makes it slightly more efficient in some ways. And so, again, I remember a woman from Ohio saying to me, I wish we had TDF in my state. It would be a really nice outlet for the material. And I was like, oh, okay. And so just hearing other people's perspectives from other states and some of the concerns that they're having really opened my eyes. So no, we can't really say it's going into road stuff, but what we can say is, the tires that can be recycled are going into that market. The tires that can't as easily be recycled are going into tire-derived fuel. And so there are markets for it, but it certainly isn't the cool seeming stuff as I think, because that's
I know. Beneficial end use would be great for it. And I've also wondered why, if it is a commodity for TDF, why people have to pay to drop it. So they're getting it on both ends. So they collect money from the solid waste people delivering the truck tires, they make their TDF and then they sell that. So they're like, kind of, they're getting money on both ends, it seems like.
Yeah, well, you can probably imagine the amount of infrastructure that is involved in these facilities. You know, they have to not only have the machinery, but as I just mentioned, you know, BDS made this large investment to move towards crumb rubber. None of this stuff is cheap, right? And so no disposal program is ever going to be free of charge if it's keeping up with the technology and keeping up with the times and keeping up with environmental regulations. There's always going to be costs associated with that, especially when these are going to the middle of nowhere, Maine. I shouldn't call it middle of nowhere because there's things around it, but they do get trucked out of state. And so, yeah, I mean, the disposal costs are, you know, calculated by so many things. Selling the commodity is typically a very small portion of their operating budget. If they even get profit from it, I'd be surprised. You know, like obviously they make profit that they can get new material, I mean, new equipment and stuff, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how profitable it actually is, but yes, I mean, that being said, you know, when it comes to farmers having a large amount of tires, they can reach out directly to BDS and he can work with them for a fee of picking up tires. I know, like, we just talked with them about salvage yards. Like, how many tires should salvage yards be allowed to hold on site at any time? And we were thinking, well, people should be able to afford to dispose of the tires. It shouldn't be above that threshold. And when we spoke to him, he was like, you know, he gave some costs for how much it might be to dispose of 1,000 tires. And while there is fees associated with it, yeah, I mean, it's not cheap by any means. Any more questions? Oh, sorry, went a little bit too fast to the next screen. But yeah, just a little bit of a brief history. So Act 78 of 1987 banned tires from landfill disposal. That started in 1992. And the EPA estimates that we generate about 1 tire per person per year. And so that would put us at about 645,000 scrap tires generated in the state each year. I would personally think that's actually maybe a little bit bigger because we have our winter tires and our summer tires as well. And the dirt roads are really great on them. And so the industry does have a statistics that 95% of scrap tires are legitimately managed, yet at the same time, in a survey of 39 states, tires was ranked number 2 on difficult to manage waste materials. And that was after household hazardous waste. And so certainly you have one side saying they're legitimately managed and another side saying, yes, but they're very difficult to manage. And Vermont is only one of 14 states that we don't have a scrap tire management program. And so there's no fee at the time of purchase or when you register your car that pays into a fund that is spent on like the cleanup of illegal tire piles. There are quite a few states that have funds for that. And just the general concerns about scrap tires. I mean, I think we can all understand that, you know, obviously they are ideal breeding grounds for mosquitoes. You know, there's illegal hauling that leads to illegal dumping. We've seen that here in Vermont, but we've also seen it on national news, like it happened in Philadelphia a few months ago, where someone just dumped like 400 tires down the bank of a river in a park. And then there's a potential for fires, which we have experienced here in Vermont as well, which all can lead to sources of pollution. And so in order for us to really get like a sense of like, all right, how much of an issue is scrap tire management? Because like we all have been talking about it. I've worked in solid waste in the state. I started in like 2016 as an AmeriCorps member, and tires have been a conversation that has happened on and off that I've been a part of, and now I get to think about more. But in 2012, after the passage of Act 148, ANR had to do a survey to estimate, you know, how many illegal tire piles are there even in the state? What is the number of waste tires that are problem, not being managed correctly, and what is the cost to dispose of them. And so, we did this by surveys to a variety of local organizations and town clerks and the regional commissions. And I will say, any tire pile that was cited as being on a farm was not included in this because, tire usage on farm as bunkers, it's an approved use. And so this didn't include anything on farms. But yeah, so they got 62 surveys. They went out and field verified a few. And what they found was, there's under 500,000 problem tires in the state of Vermont, and it would likely cost over $1 million to dispose of them all. But basically what that report concluded was that Vermont doesn't really have a illegal tire pile issue like other states do. It's more a subset of illegal dumping being an issue. But they did recommend that if the state administers funds, it should be done so judiciously. And so someone basically should be taken to court, and if they don't clean up their tires, and the state can pay to clean it up, and then we'd have to try to get a lien on their property. It seems like this very large process that I don't understand much about enforcement of, but this is when the state, A&R in my mind, as I understand, was sort of trying to take a step back from, using state solid waste funds to clean up tire piles that we would not be made whole for, because we would need people to pay the state back. And so after that came the first round of tire producer responsibility laws. And so extended producer responsibility is any law that requires a producer to help manage a product at the end of its life. Typically that management is financial, but it could be operational as well. And so tire EPR would have required all tire manufacturers to organize a statewide stewardship organization. If they did not participate, there would have been a stop sale on their brands of tires. The retailers could opt to be in the collection program, but they weren't required to be. Connecticut is now having issues with their extended producer responsibility law, where retailers do not want to be a part of the collection because they make a profit off of scrap tire disposal. And so they are trying to amend their law to require retailers to be collection sites. But there would have to be a 50% collection rate, and there'd be penalties if that wasn't met. But one thing I wanted to point out is that legacy waste tire piles, as defined in this law, would not include tires on a parcel that is farmed. And so basically any of the tire piles that we'd see on any piece of farming property wouldn't be cleaned up due to this law. And this was the first version of it. Then in 2016, we had another stakeholder group, the Beyond Waste Advisory Group, and they chose 4 materials to focus on, scrap tires being one of them. And so they, again, wanted to focus on those legacy scrap tire piles, the illegal dumping, the lack of recycling markets, which, as I mentioned, have grown in the past few years. And so the majority of the group recommended that there should be some type of fee that is placed on tires not at the time of disposal, possibly at the time of purchase or when you register your vehicle, or some form of EPR to take the financial burden off of Vermonters at the time of disposal, which would decrease illegal hauling and illegal dumping. And now we have this iteration of tire EPR. Last year it was H628, this year H204. And the law was largely the same except for this one really interesting definition of a legacy waste tire pile, defined as 50 or more waste tires, whether or not they're laying upon one another, right? I think we can all recognize on farms that is really important, because as we can see in the picture, oftentimes they're not laying on one another. And so this pile pictured here would be considered a legacy waste tire pile because they have not been sliced. And so when I read this, I thought, you know what a great way to boost up this tire slicing program. Because if they're not sliced, then that would require the stewardship organization to try to basically collect those tires off that farm. And that could be with a bounty or other financial incentives. And so if something like this were to come about, yeah, there may be some incentive, even more for farmers, to slice those tires, have a way to discard the treads, and still have the same functionality that they're accustomed to. And I think, oh yeah, and those are my sources. Yeah, and so I don't know if anyone has any questions. This is essentially all I have to share with you today. I don't believe H204 has moved out of the House, and so may not go anywhere this year, given that we're so far into the legislative session. But I will say, just like household hazardous waste EPR, tire EPR has come up over and over and over again. I think at some point something might happen with it. I can't assume what's ever going to happen with state law. But yeah, certainly when I saw this definition of a waste tire pile, I was like, all right, whether or not they're laying upon one another, it really gives that image of the silage bunker in my mind. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm clear about this. So previous legislative attempts did not include tires on farms, but the new version may. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
And
thanks.
so on previous ones, the waste tire pile was defined as 100 or more and did not say whether or not they are laying upon one another. And so you may assume that it would be an actual pile of 100 or more tires. And it specifically said, excluding tires that are on a piece of property of a person engaged in farming. It didn't say a farm, right? It was like the person is engaged in farming on the property. And then here in this most recent iteration, they also say the tires must be an annual use for anchorage on a silage bunker. And so if you have a stockpile of tires that are on the side and waiting to be used, that would also be considered a waste tire pile. And so in this, I think it seemed like they were really trying to promote slicing tires by changing this legacy waste tire pile. At least that's how I read it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yes, Patty?
So I just want to be clear that this is a great improvement in language, and I love it. It lowered the limit and also included the farm ones, but this will exclude sidewalls, right? Like this is intact tires that it refers to. So if a farmer goes and cuts, like a lot of them are doing, cut slices of sidewalls off and they're using those as bunk weights, those are fine.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because our interest, as you probably know, is mosquito breeding habitat reduction.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So great.
And I'll just stop sharing them unless anyone has any additional questions. Oh, I keep doing that, clicking too quick. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here to talk about this. I hope I was able to shed some light on tires. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I'll do my best to answer them. Or if I don't know an answer, then get a better one.
I have a question. Yeah. Generally, DEC is supportive of the most recent bill 204, if I'm quoting it correctly. Or are you guys different? Or
I am actually, I am not sure how to speak on our position yet of things. Yeah, I don't know how to talk about that as like a senior employee yet.
That's all right.
Because I know we speak favorably about extended producer responsibility in general. We recognize that, Vermonters need some relief at the point of disposal. And like I mentioned with illegal hauling, that's because, you go to a facility and they say $5 a tire, but Joe down the street, he's taking them for $2 a tire. But he's maybe just piling them up on his yard and taking that $2 a tire and spending it on something else, and then doesn't actually have the money to dispose of it. And all of a sudden it's an illegal dump site. And so if people do not have to pay for disposal, they will not pay, anyone who might not be an actual hauler. Yes, Steve?
Yeah, so is there any enforcement for illegal tire piles? I mean, if there's somebody has dumped some piles, or they have tires that accumulate on their property, they have no plan to do anything with them. Are there penalties, or is there a program to address piles like that?
Yes. So currently, one such pile is being addressed in Glover, and it is being handled as if it's an illegal solid waste facility. And so that's currently, I believe, going through enforcement and in the courts. And so the goal would be to force him to clean it up on his own. And then there was one instance, I believe, about a decade ago, where there was a tire pile, I believe in Milton, and the state did use the solid waste management fund to clean up that tire pile, but was not, I don't believe was made whole afterwards, from the person paying back. And so, even in other states where they do have funds to clean up tires, it's like they have this whole process of making sure that the person who owns the property where the tires are on, that they're a victim of a crime, and that they can identify the, who did the crime and then go after them. It's like this whole division of criminal trying to find out that activity. And so we do have enforcement on it. Barb Schwettner is typically the person who receives that information and then starts the process. But I believe it's in, really egregious situations.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that, as you can tell, we're kind of in like information gatherings. But also if you ever, want us to keep going, obviously this is something that was identified in a survey as a farmer concern, right? So if you ever want us to look into something more, we're happy to go, you know what I mean? If it fits within our responsibilities of making a recommendation or something like that, then I think the AIB is always willing to help out. And that's why we're here, is to kind of learn things so that we can make recommendations.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And I think, without knowing exactly how the process goes of making recommendations of what's in statute, it is really interesting to know that they also see this as a problem material. It's not just the states and the solid waste districts, but it's the farms. Yeah, and so I bet there's a lot more to learn there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Any more tire questions before we learn about plastic? Cool. So Ben, you are up. Thank you very much for lending your expertise to us this afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks Morgan and Stephanie for the invite to talk about plastics today. I should pre-qualify this. I'm not a plastic expert. I'm not a chemist, and I'm not even a very good teacher. So I hope I can do good justice today. I didn't know exactly. Well, I guess I should start off by saying this is kind of exciting to be talking to the Innovation Board, because it's such a cool learning environment to be able to just chomp on new ideas or things, tackle different initiatives, and kind of learn more to better the industry. So I think this is a great resource for the state. So thank you all for the work you do. I didn't know where you all wanted to go with the plastics discussion. So my plan was to just kind of do a high level overview of the different plastics types and really kind of get into some of the terminology and some of the different confusing words that are used in the industry. And try to keep that towards agricultural uses as best I can, although I'm coming at it from the composting side, so I don't have a ton of experience in the ag use. But encourage you all, if there's any questions while we're going, to just put up a hand or just speak up and ask. Don't worry about interrupting. I want to try to answer whatever questions I can while we're here. So I work in the solid waste program. I got into plastics because I deal with organics management facilities. So I permit and oversee the composting industry, solid waste composting facilities, solid waste anaerobic digesters, and solid waste depackaging facility primarily. All those have kind of their own issues with plastics and other contaminants. So through that work, I've ended up learning a fair amount about plastics. Obviously, everyone knows about plastics because we use them every day. They're everywhere. They're extremely handy. They do a lot of things well. But in this context, we're talking about plastics as polymers that are capable of being softened when they're heated, and then they harden when they cool. So you think about blow molding processes, films, maple syrup jugs, milk containers, greenhouse plastic. There's so many uses. And by and large, they're used the reason they're used so much is because they're so good at what they do and they're so cheap. So you think about how they've really extended the life of food products and vegetables and things to be able to get it from the farm to the consumer. That's a huge resource savings to be able to get that food to the table without having it spoil. So on one hand, plastics are great, but when plastics get into the environment, we're learning, maybe they're not so great. So the traditional type of plastic that I wanted to talk about is the hydrocarbon-based plastics. And this is, if you remember back to the high school chemistry days, or maybe some of you have taken more advanced chemistry than I have, that's the carbon backbone with hydrogens off the side. Those tend to be petroleum-based, and they're also really, really stable. So the issue with that is when they get into the environment, they tend to be persistent and they tend to hang out for a long time. There's no microbes or that are really good at breaking those carbon bonds, so they tend to persist for quite a long time. They'll break down, they will quote unquote degrade, but it's not a biodegradation, which I guess I'll get into those terms a little later, but it's more of a physical ripping of the plastic and leaving the little fragments behind. But the plastic itself persists for a long time. A stat that I heard once at a U.S. Composting Council presentation said that, and this might be a little dated because this was a couple years back, but it basically said that of the 454 million tons of plastic produced, 348 million tons is hydrocarbon based. So that's the traditional plastics that we all think of. That's by and large what we're dealing with. And those are the ones that, can be around for an extremely long time if they get into the environment. They tried to, one more thing about the bonds on those, they can be broken down from a polymer, which is a long chain of molecules. They can be broken down through a process called pyrolysis, but it's extremely energy intensive. And it takes I forget what it is, 400 degrees C to be able to run that process. And it leaves you with, biochar, water, tar. What am I missing? I'm missing something else. Liquids, waxes, things like that. It breaks it down to its components, but it's extremely energy intensive. And it's not something it's not a treatment method that we have readily available in Vermont to deal with all of our plastics, unfortunately. So one of the early ways that people tried to combat that persistent hydrocarbon-based plastic was coming up with oxo-degradable plastics. They call them oxo additives sometimes. And basically what that is different chemical accelerants that are added to the plastic polymer in different locations, either in between carbon bonds on the chain or off the carbon bonds in the chain, that allow the polymer to be broken down into chunks, fragments, when they're exposed to heat, light, air, water sometimes, different things like that. The trouble with it is that oxo-degradable plastics, it doesn't truly biodegrade. It doesn't break it down to its elemental pieces. It basically, there's a weak spot in the chain, it breaks there, and then you're left with these, shorter polymers or maybe even monomers that remain persistent because they're hydrocarbon-based backbone kind of monomers. So it's kind of like, I think of oxo-degradable plastics as as an attempt to solve a problem, but they didn't really solve the problem. They just made it visually like, oh, look at that plastic is breaking down. But actually it's just getting smaller to the point where maybe we can't see it, but it's still there. Which is, as you all know, if you're into soil health stuff, that's the big problem is plastics that can get into the soil that we don't necessarily see and may not even know they're there, but can clearly impact a lot of the soil properties, physiochemical properties, things of that nature, because the plastics themselves, the particle itself can affect the water holding capacity of the soils. Different additives that may be in the plastic itself might impact, the charge of the molecules surrounding it, so it can impact the soil that way. They can impact aggregate formation in soil matrices. So there's all kinds of ways that plastics that are present there can impact the soil health. So necessarily making them smaller doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It just could make it harder to see, maybe even make it worse. The third category of plastics that I wanted to talk about is the compostable plastics. And I think that's probably what most people were curious to talk about the most. Those are plastics that are designed to be broken down in a composting environment. And I think the difference there is the key to note about the composting environment is that doesn't necessarily mean if it's just laying out in the soil. That's not the composting environment we're talking about. We're talking about sort of a controlled environment where there's access to heat, there's access to moisture, there's access to oxygen, and there's a prolific microbial community to do the biodegradation. So that's sort of the quote unquote compostable plastic needs to clear that hurdle. And even compostable plastics may not break down if they're just in the soil matrix. They need that composting environment that they're designed to break down in order to really succeed. And I think we'll come back to more on that a little bit later. But real quick, some terminology about that you might have heard about bioplastics. Or bio-based is another term that's used in the industry and can often be misleading. Consumers or people that are buying plastics are like, oh, this is bio-based. It's, it's good. It's environmentally friendly. And really all that means is that some amount of the polymer that's used in the plastic was derived from natural plant materials. So it can be, and there's no legal definition on what bio-based means. So it could be 20% bioplastic and 80% hydrocarbon plastic, and it could still be quote unquote labeled or marketed as a bioplastic or a bio-based. So as you can tell, it's the terminology matters and understanding what things mean, because it's not always, plastics are not always as advertised. If people think they're buying a green, environmentally friendly product, and it turns out it's mostly hydrocarbon plastic, and isn't much better than the traditional material.
I have a question, Ben.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Have you heard of any movement towards making a standard definition for that? Like you would think that maybe some industries might, think of the beginning of organic, right? Everyone throwing that term around and then it gets standardized. Is there any movement that you've heard in your learnings and jobs that they are moving towards a standard definition of bioplastic?
There is a lot of work towards other terminologies to getting actual standard definitions to other areas. The bio-based thing is sort of a greenwashing thing. I don't think the industry holds a lot of, it doesn't see that sort of term as being useful, but I think the industry really is getting behind compostable, the term compostable, to the point where, the most commonly used compostable polymer is PLA, polylactic acid, which is derived from cornstarch or sugarcane. So it is bio-based, 100% bio-based, but more importantly, it passes the compostable testing standards. So there's ASTM standards that the U.S. Composting Council uses to certify, and BPI is doing certification as well to certify compostable plastics. And basically what that certification is some paperwork, what are you including in your plastic? Are you intentionally including any PFAS? Yes or no? And then they do a total organic fluorine test on the plastic as well to make sure it's less than 100. So even if you're not intentionally adding PFAS, if it exceeds 100 parts per million of total organic fluorine, then it can't get certified because there's some other issue at hand there. So they're doing that. That's one piece. The other piece is a lab test. So they put it through a lab biodegradation test. And I should probably define what biodegradation means is the availability of the compounds in the plastic to microbes. So the microbes have to break the bonds and use the energy from the plastic either to respirate, to breathe out, or to include some amount of it in their tissue, in their bacterial tissue. So if the microbes are completely able to consume the plastic, then that passes. If there's some left over, then it doesn't pass. There are some issues with the lab testing that we can get into later if people are interested, but that's the lab test. And then they're also starting to get into field testing as well, which, as you know, Sean, let me finish this thought real quick, and then you can ask your question. But the field testing is a big piece too, because just because something passes in a lab under very controlled conditions doesn't mean that it's going to pass in someone's windrow or a farmer's windrow. And really, that's what matters the most. You know what I mean? Especially in Vermont winters, some things can be slow or they might take longer. So if a quote unquote certified compostable plastic isn't going to break down in a windrow, then what good is it if it's residual? Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious, is there like a time frame in that determination of whether it's completely or partially degradable?
Yeah, I haven't read the ASTM in a long time, but there is a time frame, so I don't know what it is, but you're right, because ultimately, even hydrocarbon based plastics would eventually, on some time horizon, break down, right? But there is, I forget exactly how many days they use, but I can look it up and get back to you.
Cool. Appreciate
But
it.
good call. That is a key piece because it's got to be able to break down in a typical composting process, which can vary, but it's usually on the order of several months and not years.
Yep. Thanks.
Yep. So that's so the biodegradable piece is a big one because degradable, meaning it can break down in chunks, it physically breaks down with freeze thaw cycles or heaven forbid, like being tilled in. That's degradation. The particles are getting smaller, but biodegradation means it's actually being used by the microbial community and being pulled into the soil matrix in a stable way. So that's a key term that BPI is really doing a lot to kind of establish. Go ahead, Leon.
I was on a agricultural trip to California in 2012, and out there had been some company that turned ag plastic into replacement sidewalk panels. So when a concrete sidewalk panel cracked, they would dig it out and replace it with these panels made of recycled ag plastic. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't. I mean, I know historically there's been a lot of recycled plastic, dimensional lumber products that have been built and things of that nature for like decking and whatnot. But I haven't heard that piece specifically about the sidewalk panels. It's a good idea, but I'm kind of a little bit removed from the recycling markets. I'm more in the organic side of things. So, interesting anecdote.
Along the same line, we actually have some plastic fence posts that we bought, I want to say 20 or 25 years ago. They were available at Agway stores at the time, and they are about 2 inches in diameter and 5 feet high. And they're very long lasting. We have probably 3, 4 dozen of them that are still in use. And my understanding at the time is that they were also recycled plastic, but they disappeared, and I don't know why that was. So I'm just putting that out there, whether someone has time to look into whether, any of these options still exist in other parts of the country, and there's some way to encourage the markets for that to move to where we are.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know historically in Vermont, and I think Shannon touched on it a little bit in her presentation, it's difficult for a rural state like us to really move the needle on some of these things because you sort of need a certain critical mass to be able to push some of these more expensive projects to be able to recycle. And then you got to get the plastics from the corners of the state to this central processing facility. And usually the economics don't work out. But it is certainly worth keeping an eye on to see if it's something Vermont can mimic if it's working well elsewhere. I think by and large, where I see the industry going, at least from a food packaging standpoint, which is kind of where I focused most of my efforts, is it seems like everyone's kind of going towards the compostable plastics route, just saying the best we can do is to get away from traditional plastics and just try to find a compostable packaging if it works for their product, obviously, that's number one. But it seems like a lot of the larger companies and even the Vermont-based companies are kind of going that route. The trouble with that is, and kind of what I wanted to loop it back to, is that can put one of the issues in the industry is a lot of things are listed as certified, or a lot of things are marketed as compostable products. And so, any homeowner can buy something off Amazon or whatever, shop that they shop at that's green. It looks green. It's actually physically colored green, and it says it's compostable. And then they use it. It gets into the food scraps, and that goes to downstream to the composting facility, who finds out, hey, this isn't actually compostable. So then what? Maybe they can screen it out. But if it gets into such a small particle size that it gets through the screener and into the finished compost, and then it goes to land, it gets land applied or spread on a garden, then it becomes, more of a permanent inhabitant in the soil until it can actually be broken down. So I think that's one of the biggest issues facing the industry is having certification programs in place that back that up. I mentioned BPI certification program. They have a database online where they have all their products listed. You can look it up there. Europe has a couple. TUV, I don't know what the acronym stands for. I don't recall. In Austria, and then they use a DIN certification in Europe. So DIN's Certo or Certo, CERTO is another one that has a database where they approve compostable, I think it's just compostable plastics, but it might be compostable products. So some of that work is starting to happen now. And BPI is doing a really good job of making sure that it's visibly, that they have indications and markings on the products that say, so when you're in the field and you're looking at two green cups that look exactly the same, one of them will have a marking with a BPI certification, the other one won't. You should be able to visually tell when you're looking at the product, okay, I have confidence that this one's compostable. This one I'm going to put in the trash because it's a big question mark. So it might be more interesting to talk about ag applications. I don't know if anyone has any questions or experience with ag applications of compostable products or even plastics that might be in excess where there's a need to come up with an alternative solution. But I know from my own experience with, plastic mulches and even the Agrobon wind row covers and things like that. A lot of these plastics are not meant to last and can tear easily and break down pretty quickly with UV. And I just, you know that they're just getting into soils sort of in the, the nanoparticle size, which is the, probably the biggest concern, right, from an environmental standpoint. So one more quick thought. I wanted to loop back as well to the lab testing. I mentioned about the lab testing before that BPI requires. And so basically when they do their test, they take the plastic, the compostable plastic that they're testing, and they grind it into a fine powder. And then they run it, they give microbes access to it, and then they measure respirometry. So they're kind of measuring how much of the plastic is basically off-gassed from the microbes eating it, which works well in a lab setting. But the issue with that is it relies, it's giving you information about a powder, right? So a lot of the compostable plastics that you're using in either a composting situation or an agricultural situation, those aren't powders, right? They're They're usually films, or sometimes they're thicker. So sometimes the thickness of a product that you're composting matters, because you want the microbes to have access to the plastic, and if it's really thick, it's going to take them a long time to work their way through it. So thickness can be an issue, or multiple layers. If you have a compostable product that has multiple layers, sometimes the microbes can't get in between layers, and that can be difficult as well. So that's something where the lab results may not always translate to field results. And the other issue could be that maybe suboptimal composting conditions. So maybe the piles aren't hot enough, or the recipe's not mixed correctly, or it's not given enough time or temperature, or any number of things to be able to compost successfully. So to test that, there's actually a group, I don't know if I have it in my notes. I'm blanking on the company. Compost Manufacturing Alliance is the name of the group, and they're working with the Compost Research and Education Foundation to stand up a compost field testing program. And this is basically a process where they'll allow, if there's a composter that says, we're working with, a really large school or hospital, and they really, or a festival or whatever, and they really want to use these compostable products, it allows the composter to test those products in their system, in their windrow, with their recipe, with their equipment and their process, and get information on the back end whether or not the product is successful in their operation. So that field testing can be critical, but it's usually mostly helpful if you have a bottleneck and control over who's providing you the compostable products, right? It's not going to work if you're collecting all the organics from the town of Brattleboro and everyone's throwing in their own compostable product, but it will work if you're working with, Hospital Y, and they're only buying from one vendor, and they're only buying one compostable cup or plate, and it's coming to you. So that's a really critical thing that can work well for composters and or farmers to kind of protect themselves ahead of time. Even if you don't work through the Compost Manufacturing Alliance process, they have protocols that they've developed that you can get, and you can test it out yourself. So I always encourage people to do that. Because even the compostable plastics, when they get in the soil, might have negative impacts, like the fragments themselves, or the films, or the fibers, could still have detrimental impacts to the soil, even if they are compostable, just because of their physical nature. So there's that concern as well. I don't know that I have a whole lot else to talk about. I don't know if anyone has any other questions, or Morgan, if there's anything specific that you were hoping to cover.
Hold on, thank you. I wanted to say Shannon had her hand up for a second, but did you have something
Oh,
to
sorry, I
add?
missed that.
No, you were good.
Yeah, because like films were mentioned, and like when I think of ag films, just from my time in the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District, back in the day, they attempted to collect bale wrap from farmers in the area. And it was being sent over to a proposed chemical recycling facility in Groveton, New Hampshire, that, as far as I know, never really got up to 100% production. It just never really started. And so, being from that district, we got a lot of backlash when we stopped collecting bale wrap, because so many people really enjoyed having that outlet for their clean bale wrap. But there has been a new initiative from and I put the link in the chat, from the Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance. They are, with their member farmers, collecting bale wrap and shipping it to EFS in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. I believe it is one of the closest plastic film recycling outlets in the Northeast. Yeah, I think it's one of the only ones that's actually in production, in not just some place that's collecting film to hopefully start like in Groveton, like they were doing. And so if you do know of any farmers that would be interested in this, right now they are starting along the Connecticut River watershed area, but I do believe they are branching out as far as they're able to go, and it's a pilot project. And so, yeah, that is a new program that's available to some Vermont farmers, depending on where they are.
We actually had a member come to us in March and talk about
great.
like Mike Snow.
Mike Snow, yeah.
Came and talked to us about
Yes.
that. and
I
kind of
figured you were
the
probably
new-
aware.
But it's very much, it's like we were just, in March, it was like, we're just trying to figure this out,
Yeah.
like it was very much like they just got funding, they just got a grant and so
Yes.
they just got some money. And so it will be interesting for us to kind of keep up on that and how it goes and how it can grow.
Oh,
Maybe.
definitely, yeah.
That was a little bit of my question. I don't know if Ben, you or Shannon or any of Leon or any of the other, I don't see Steve Schubert on the call. Bale wrap, I think, is a lot of the plastic on farms in Vermont. But do you think that there will ever be one of these alternative plastic options for bale wrap? Or does it have to be a hydrocarbon? I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows. I'm just asking the question.
Well, I would just comment that one of the problems that we and as farmers face is they want it clean. And most of us either put our bales on sod or on gravel pads, and it's very, very difficult to have the plastic end up clean. So we've not signed on to, we're actually a member of the Connecticut River Farmers Watershed Alliance, but we haven't signed on because we haven't been able to figure out how we can have it be as clean as they're wanting it to be. So there's a real issue there with them not wanting any contaminants in the plastic you're trying to recycle. And on most farms, it would take, it would create another project to actually wash the plastic before you could recycle it. So that's a big hang up in my mind.
It's a great point. And I do know that there's a group of retailers, I think, that have formed a co-op where they're baling plastic wrap from pallets and stuff and recycling that. But that's a much different ball game than you're dealing with, Leon, in the field. It's a lot cleaner, obviously, at a store than it is on a farm. So that's definitely a major concern and a major obstacle for plastic recycling agriculturally.
Ben, I don't know if you know, I guess, does the properties or like the barrier properties of compostable plastics versus the traditional hydrocarbon, is it different or does it vary as far as like moisture barrier, oxygen barrier?
Yeah, I wish I did know. We were working with a packaging consultant, an expert. I think she was based out of Minnesota, and I would ask her all those questions, and so I don't know the answer to that, but I can certainly ask and see what she says. I do know that the world of compostable plastics, and I'm not touting them as a solution, but I do know that the plastics themselves have come a long way in a short amount of time because there's so much interest from the food manufacturers in sort of coming up with an alternative. But I don't know specifically, Morgan.
That's fine. I wonder maybe if you could provide us with the name of that consultant, maybe we can reach out to her as AIB. Thanks. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's work being done on developing these and testing these products. What's a good way to keep up with what's happening and new developments? And, if something did come along that was a possible solution, that we could learn more about it or maybe encourage it or whatever. Is there some mechanism for that?
In terms of ag applications or just plastic?
Specifically ag.
Well, I know I was working with EB Florio from AAFM in
EB Florio. She's our dairy.
Yeah, she was working on directly with USDA on some food packaging issues, and I know that she had some contacts at USDA. I would think that that avenue might be the most promising because I don't deal in the agricultural world, so I'm not kind of keyed into those circles about, hey, this new bale wrap or this new plastic mulch alternative is the next best thing. But maybe that pathway, maybe just throwing out ideas.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of innovations like this come out of either USDA Agricultural Research Service or land grant colleges doing research. And is Roy, you still on? Is still on the call or not? But hey, Roy. Yeah. Is there anything or anybody at UVM working on plastics? Do you know about? I know we had some folks from UVM come talk to us about microplastics, but just wondering if any in the ag engineering department or anybody like that, or they know anybody. I mean, that's where it would come from, is from ag engineering.
So there well maybe. I can't speak specifically to that at this minute. Sean, do you have anything to add to that? But probably our one of our departments, maybe SEMS or engineering department, might have some folks who are working on that, but I can't speak specifically to it right now, right this minute. Sean, do you have something?
No, I just, I don't know of anybody working on it specifically at UVM, but I know just in the 9 months that I've been with UVM and its extension, I get that question a lot. It's particularly around life of plastic in the soil and how is it impacting crops or animals grazing, right? So it's a lot of people are thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be worth looking around, ag engineering. Maybe I'll do a internet search for ag engineering departments working on bioplastics. Something pop up.
So we do have an ag engineering extension, and I know that they're also working with food safety, which could put the two things together. And one of the questions I had at the back of my mind for Ben was whether there might be any kind of PFAS materials associated with any of the plastics and the packaging stuff that you mentioned earlier. But I hesitated because I didn't want a question to come back saying who's working on that in extension or UVM, and I didn't know the answer to that.
Yeah, the 4-letter word. Yeah, that's a good thing. Good question. And something I meant to talk about is that one of the issues with plastics, particularly non-certified plastics, is the additives. Because for different applications, there's thousands of different plastic polymers that are in use. They'll have different applications, and the different additives can be PFAS for grease proofing or non-stick reasons, or flame retardants for fireproofing. So there's all kinds of things that can be added to plastics during the manufacturing process that aren't necessarily disclosed. So when you're buying things downstream, either as a consumer or as a farmer, you don't necessarily know what's in it because that information isn't there or isn't easy to find. But it's definitely a big concern. The other issue with plastics themselves is when the microplastics or nanoplastics get into the environment, depending on the charge and the properties of the plastic itself, different compounds can adhere to them. Is one thing that we're learning, and that can make them, more mobile, depending on the microplastic or nanoplastic shape. That can make them more mobile in a water environment, or make them more likely to stay in the soil versus mobilize in the water. So there's so many different factors to it and that's the reason why we don't know a lot about uptake or plastics in the soil and uptake into animals or plant tissues, is because it's so difficult to say with any amount of sureness and to test that stuff because there's so many variables there. But yeah, all that is possible for sure.
Thanks.
Ben, I'd hazard to guess, just on a follow-up there, Ben, that if things are bonding to it, it could also affect the biodegradability and potentially stabilize some of that microplastic and make it harder for the microorganisms to attack it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I was just reading that. Do you know, Ben, the status of like, is DEC doing any research about microplastics?
Doing any research? Yeah.
So I'm thinking your P2 grant.
There you go. So Act 170 passed. I'm losing track of the years now. It was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I forget. Required DEC to host a depackager stakeholder group, which was focused on requiring DEC to kind of oversee this new technology that basically it's a, I don't know if you're all familiar, but it's basically mechanical process to separate the contents of a food from the packaging. So soda bottles, cans of soup, whatever can go into this machine. Paddles go around and it basically separates the organic contents from the packaging itself. So we had to have the run the DPAC stakeholder group with other stakeholders. I don't see Steve Cash here, but he was the rep from Agency of Ag on that stakeholder group process. And part of Act 170, in addition to the stakeholder group discussion, was for us to aggregate all the data that was available on PFAS and microplastics in the organics recycling system in Vermont and worldwide. So that's a lot to chew on. At the time, there wasn't a lot available. We used the UVM stuff that sounds like UVM probably spoke to you folks already. They have since started another research study to look at anaerobic digestate, as I understand. But at the time, they had some on DPAC, some on compost, finished compost, but it was a relatively small amount of information. I think it was like 20 samples or something like that. So we were concerned about solid waste management practices in the state above and beyond sort of what legislature required us to speak to them about. So we started a pollution prevention study where we went around to digesters, composters, and to the DPAC facility in Vermont, and we basically took samples of their feedstocks because we were like, we don't know a lot about PFAS or microplastics in the organics recycling system in Vermont. We want to kind of flag, A, is there a problem that needs immediate attention? Or B, is it present, at relatively low levels, and we can figure out how to get that out upstream by, creative management or by focusing on it. And so we're working on that now. We're actually going to be wrapping it up hopefully soon, Morgan. And I can share the report with this group or with you if you want to send it to the group if that's appropriate.
Yeah,
but I think the good news right now is it doesn't seem like, from our samples that we've collected, it doesn't seem like there's any, from a feedstock perspective in Vermont, and to put it in context, the organics recycling system in Vermont is very clean compared to other states and other facilities that I've been to in the country. Vermont does it really well. I mean, the composters that have been composting here have been doing it for a long time. And by and large, they're doing a good job of keeping things clean. Act 148 was passed and went into full effect in 2020 and required everybody to be separating food scraps from the garbage. And that sort of brought on some companies that were doing it more out of obligation than out of sort of mission. So I can't say that it's all completely pure because it isn't. But I've been to other states, and Vermont we're connected to our farms, we're connected to the soil in a way that other states aren't. And I think that people get it when they're separating their food scraps in a way that, people from other states don't necessarily. So, yeah, sorry if I'm ranting, but quick update on P2.
No, that's good. I kind of put you on the spot.
All
Thank
good.
you.
This has been
One of the
very,
things
this has
that-
been great. Thank you very much. It's very
I was going to say
informative.
one last thing that might be of interest to this group. The one thing that did sort of flag on some of our samples that might be of interest to folks here was, and we think it's traced, I might be speaking a little bit out of turn, but we think it's traced back to the polypropylene grain bags. So some of the grains, we think we don't fully understand it, but the working theory now is that abrasiveness from the dry grains inside the bag fed to, we think it was poultry manure. That manure went into the compost, and we took a sample of that manure itself and processed it for plastics. And there was I wouldn't say a high amount, but there was some very clear polypropylene microfibers in there. And we think it was from the grain bag. So that might be an area where there's room for additional research and sort of learning from that. But we don't have enough samples to make it statistically representative, but it was something that was like, okay, this could be a direct link right here.
Does make sense. Well, thank you. I mean, does anyone else have any other questions? Ben, we really appreciate it. And same thing, we'll keep you informed as we go. You know, we're basically just dipping our toes into this right now. Go ahead, Leon.
Leon.
Yeah, I was thinking about what Steve said about Googling. So while we were listening to Ben, I just put recyclable agricultural plastics into the search engine, and it came up with some ideas, and I did click on the first one, and it's a company in Australia. So I'm wondering if maybe we should be investigating having one of those companies actually come speak to one of these meetings and maybe ask Ben to come back, because he may understand what they're saying better than any of us would.
I think that's a great idea, Leon. You up for it, Ben?
Yeah, I'll
Learn
join you
with
in
us.
person next time.
Well, I don't know where that in person is going to be, depending on construction here in Williston, but I will let you know. Leon, thank you. If you want to send me if it's a specific one that you want me to contact and look into, just send me an email with anything in there and I can reach out and see what we can learn.
I'll look at them a little bit more and see if there are some that make sense, maybe for you to contact.
Great. Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, I think this is something that folks here at the agency, we can do a little digging around. Zach Schakowsky texted me, said he's aware of some things. So why don't we do a little research? And Leon and anybody else, if you see or hear about an outfit that has some biodegradable ag plastic material that might be of use, let's just do a little research and then come back, and it'd be great if Benjamin, you can come back and sort of ground truth it for us, so we don't buy the greenwashing, that kind of thing. That'd be real helpful. I think that could be a project we can take on.
Yep. Anything else before I open it up? So just to recap, our next meeting is July 28th. I think we're going to stick to our every other month right now. If we will definitely keep you informed of the rulemaking process as those BMPs go through. So if something happens in between that time, we will let you know. So keep tuned into your email. And yeah, if you find things for ag plastics, I'll put it as an action item in our minutes too, but send them my way and we can start digging and finding some more experts to come. I do know in July, another colleague of Shannon and Ben is coming, Mia, to talk a little bit more about extended producer responsibility programs that we have in Vermont. So she's coming. And then we also have Clean Farms, which is an outfit in Canada that Stephanie, help me out here. So that basically they have a program
They
that
have programs for, plastic recycling, all types of plastic, agricultural plastic recycling. So.
yes. So so we will learn from those are two things that are set up right now for July. Today is actually Victoria Day in Canada, so that's why they couldn't. So happy Victoria Day if anyone's Canadian. That's why they couldn't come today, so they're pushed to July. But so those are two exciting things to learn and look forward to in July. Okay. Anything else? Awesome. Does any member of the public who has joined us today wish to make any comment? Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. Send stuff my way. Let's learn together, and just tremendous thanks to our DEC colleagues. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us today and joining us. So thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Yes, thank you for inviting us. It's always